Comments from U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio just hours after the American military seized 2 oil tankers linked to Venezuela, one of which is a Russian-flagged vessel. Rubio laying out the plan there as the U.S. seeks to move in and run oil production of the world's largest oil reserves, a potentially tectonic shift for the global energy industry that sparked angst here in Canada, as the U.S. is by far our largest export destination for a product that directly competes with Venezuelan oil. Premiers are now stepping up pressure to access new markets for Canadian crude, including Saskatchewan's Scott Moe. Hi, Premier. Pleasure to welcome you back to the program. Thank you so much for making the time.
Well, thank you, Bessie, and Happy New Year to you and all your listeners.
A Happy New Year to you as well, Premier, and all of your colleagues. I wanted to start off on the post this week from you online in response to essentially what's unfolded with Venezuela and Trump's desire to see more U.S. access to Venezuelan oil. From everything I've read, it's nowhere near a given that Venezuela will be able to increase its oil exports. Does it really make sense for Canada to pursue new policies or pipelines here to counter a threat that I can't really find a single credible expert say will definitely materialize?
Well, it's 3 things. One, there's some existing production from Venezuela. If that finds its way to the U.S. market, that's one thing. It could potentially displace Western Canadian oil. The second thing is, if there is investment, you could see increased not only export capacity for Venezuelan oil, but increased production as well. That could replace Western Canadian oil in the U.S. However, we also need to understand that, oil is sold in a global marketplace, and Canadian oil can be sold in the global marketplace as well. What's restricted that, and 95% of oil from our province goes to the U.S. because we've been restricted on our ability to actually get it to the West Coast or to a port of any kind. And so, the race is on, I think, definitely for Canada to expand our ability to get our products, all products, including oil, but other products as well, to global markets around the world, to ensure our port capacity, our rail capacity is operating at a level that the world can access the products that we are producing so that we can continue to secure our economic future as Canadians. So, there is a certain race, I think, that is on here now, and we're part of it.
I certainly understand your point about the race and the political and economic impetus to diversify markets, but does the business case exist? And I'll go back to my original question, which is, we don't know for sure what you described will materialize, but even beyond that, even if it does a bit, what that will do is add to already what is a supply glut that exists that's keeping the prices of oil at this point fairly depressed relative to where they could be. Does that not undermine the business case for an additional pipeline?
Well, the race is on anyway. We're already taking a discount on the oil that we're producing because we don't have that global market access, or other countries around the world don't have access to Western Canadian oil, and so we should be having this conversation. And then again, I say not just about oil, but about all of our port capacity. We see other investments being made not in Canada because of questions around whether it be our rail capacity or our port capacity. We need to have a very serious conversation about, having that port capacity, allowing the world to access our products so that we can continue to create wealth on the existing production and value that we have. But also, we want to increase the value of, in Saskatchewan, we not only want to increase our oil production, we want to increase potash, uranium, copper, all of those. So this is important for us as Canadians, and I would say, in a very uncertain trade world, we see things happening with the capture of President Maduro. It's of utmost importance that we move quickly to secure our economic future and secure the access that we have to those countries around the world.
Are you sure, though, that that's what's going to happen? And again, I take your point on wanting to make sure the markets have that access to Canada, but ultimately, private companies are going to make those investment decisions. Is a private company going to decide to pursue the construction of a new pipeline when oil prices are depressed thanks to a supply glut? And isn't that something that should be a part of the debate that's taking place, and that you, for example, and Premier Smith neglect rather to incorporate into the arguments that you put forth for a pipeline?
Well, it seems that the United States of America and the president is interested in making that kind of an investment at these oil prices in Venezuela, when he already has that investment made accessing Canadian oil industries today. So the answer is yes. However, that's the second piece to the very serious conversation that we have to have as Canadians about determining and securing our economic future is alongside that port capacity. We need a regulatory environment that is going to allow that private equity, that private investment to flow. And I would say that over the course of the last decade, we haven't had that regulatory environment or even a hint of a collaborative conversation around it. But that seems to be changing. And I would point to the most recent MOU that was signed by Prime Minister Carney and Premier Smith. That's a positive step forward. Now we need to act on it. And in light of what's happened in the last week, I would say that we need to be serious about acting on it sooner rather than later.
I know that you're more politically aligned with one neighbor in Premier Smith, but Premier Eby has been a loud voice in all of this as well. I understand, like I said, the arguments you're putting forward for diversified markets. It obviously involves his province, though, so very specifically, if a pipeline goes to that coast, it will. He has expressed opposition to that. He says that the discussion about a pipeline that does not, to be clear, does not yet have a private proponent is threatening resource development that could greatly benefit BC and the rest of Canada in the form of LNG. Do you have some sympathy for that? That this kind of project that has yet to actually have a proponent is threatening ones that do?
I would say that, well, first, when it comes to whether or not a pipeline will be built, Premier Eby is a provincial premier and he can weigh in with his opinions or thoughts. But ultimately, the decision is the federal government's to make. But there's some work to be done in order for that to happen. There's some other opportunities, and I think Premier Eby has been in agreement with this as well. The short-term opportunity for us to increase that port capacity is to expand the capacity through TMX, the existing pipeline, and I think we should be looking at doing that sooner rather than later. Second to that, I think just today he mentioned there had some comments with respect to refining capacity. I agree with that. We should be trying to attract that investment, and the best way to do it is to restructure the environmental regulatory process that we have, both at provincial levels and in particular the federal level, to go out and shop for that kind of an investment. And I would, I would align with Premier Eby, and I'm sure other premiers would as well, in order for us to be able to do that. We haven't seen that type of a commitment by the previous prime minister, and we certainly haven't seen that type of a commitment to that regulatory realignment by NDP premiers, certainly in BC in the last while. But that's new and that's innovative, and I think we could look into that certainly, but it would take some regulatory work.
If, in fact, the pipeline does come to fruition to the West Coast, the primary customer, it's Asia, but it's really China, right? And we know that right now from what's gone on with TMX. The Prime Minister is making a trip to China next week, and I do want to ask you about that trip. First, though, I just want to ask you about, I understand, like I keep saying, the impetus for diversifying markets, but if we are diversifying from one unstable trading partner to another in China, is that really a recipe for economic success for Canada? Is that necessarily the right move?
Well, the Port of Vancouver, I think, first and foremost is, yes, that's an access point to Asian markets and China, but it's also an access to all markets around the world. And that's important for us to remember and important for us to focus on is all countries around the world. Now, China is one of the largest economies, one of the highest populated countries, so it needs to be part of that conversation if we are going to diversify our trade in any way, but not just China. There's India. There's many other countries. Saskatchewan, our province, we sell products to over 160 countries each and every year, and that hasn't come easily. That's come with a lot of focus, a lot of effort, and a lot of work, not just by the government, but more importantly by the industries that are exporting those products. So it's not just about China, but China is definitely part of that conversation. And I, commend Prime Minister Carney, and we've been in discussions with them to some degree on this visit and engagement with China. As you know, I was there just over a month ago with Cody Blois, the parliamentary secretary. But I commend Prime Minister Carney not only for engaging with China, but for really raising the priority and the credibility of Canada in that world trade sphere and focusing on trade in his conversations there. That being said, when tariffs come on with a country like China, that is an event. And we have some experience in removing those tariffs from Saskatchewan's perspective over the last number of decades. And that is more of a process. And so this visit, glad to see it, support it, but it's going to be part of a broader process on, how can we remove the tariffs on some of the products, namely canola for us in Saskatchewan, but also open up opportunities for additional trade with China beyond what we even do today. So good step.
But on that note, with great respect, I understand that you're getting access to Asia more largely, but China is, if we're looking to make a meaningful move away from the United States, the obvious choice to receive in particular our natural resources. And when you mention tariffs, those punishing canola tariffs, for example, they have not been hesitant before when they see a vulnerability in the trading relationship to utilize it, to weaponize it against us to achieve an objective. Is it a smart move to rely on them more?
Well, I think we have to look at not relying on China, but expanding some of our market diversification or some of what we sell today and some of the increased value in production that we're going to produce tomorrow to a country like China. They are one of the largest economies in the world, and to ignore them, I think would be a tremendous error. So we are going to have to find a way to deal with China. We've been finding that way for decades now. From Saskatchewan's perspective, we're over $4 billion in exports that we send there each and every year. We've had a strong trading relationship, but it hasn't been without challenges. And at the root of the challenge that we have today is we have a president that's resetting trade relations with virtually every country all at the same time, and it's got direct and indirect consequences for Canadians and people that are working in Canadian industries. And the path through that is engagement. The path through that is exactly what we saw this morning, the announcement that the Prime Minister is going to be back in China, fostering and advancing that trade relationship with the country. We hope that there'd be tariffs, removed immediately. But as I say, history has said that the removal of those tariffs does take some time. The path to that removal is exactly what's happening right now. So sooner rather than later is the hope and the effort and the goal. And I think we are finding our way in that conversation from the talks that I've had with the Prime Minister's office and others.
And just one quick final question, a point of clarification. Do you expect those tariffs on canola to be removed during this trip, or do you think it'll come at a different or later time?
Yeah, I would hope they would be. It's my wish and my ask that they would be, not only on canola, but pulses, seafood, as well as pork. I don't know that that's realistic. That hasn't been our experience, in the last few times that we've had to deal with tariffs in China or India or anywhere. It is, like I say, more of a process than it is an event. But we have seen them removed virtually each and every time that they've been added. And the way that they're removed is through engagement, like what we're seeing right now by Prime Minister Carney and provinces like Saskatchewan as well. So we need to work together, and we need to work towards that common goal, which is, one, to have existing tariffs removed, and two, I would say, to advance additional opportunities to trade not only with China but many other countries around the world. And we see a renewed focus in that space, and it's about time, I tell you.
Okay, Premier, I'm going to leave it on that note. I appreciate your time as always. Thank you so much.
Take care, Bessie.